This is the journey to one Africa.
It is true that many countries in Africa, and therefore the continent of Africa compared to others, is not as economically developed as she should be, given the resources that she has, both human resources, which I consider to be the most important resource, and natural resource. But the question you are asking me is not one that has not been asked before. It was asked of Julius Kambarage Nyerere in 1967, and this was his answer. He says, we in the continent of Africa do not necessarily believe that development are tall buildings and modern things. Those are good, and they are symbols of development. But what we consider to be the most important component of development is human development. Creating a man and a woman who has confidence, a man and a woman who is an agent for change and who can be a catalyst for that which is good for himself or herself and for the general good. So when we talk about development, we want to mention GDPs. That is also good. But do we ever talk about gross national happiness as the people of Bhutan do? But be that as it may, it is true that we could have done better in many areas. And there are many reasons why we have been held back. Your typical post-colonial state is just slightly over 60 years. When you talk about Ghana and even Sudan, if you may, if you want to say, that is in that category. And during that entire period, it must also be remembered that there have always been attempts, which are still alive and well, to ensure that Africa does not realize our potential. And one can give examples. A country like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is the richest resource country on earth. No sooner had she gained her independence than the Belgians and the Americans were there, causing confusion, and that confusion is still alive today. So that as I speak, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the eastern part of it, which has numerous resources, has no less than 120 militia groups. The Kinshasa government does not control it. So they are not in control of their gold, they are not in control of their coltan, they are not in control of their resources, they are not in control of their resources. If you go to southern Cameroons, people have not been going to school for the last 6 years in southern Cameroons or Ambazonia. We are witness to the recent happenings in Tigray, in Ethiopia, in Somalia, in Central African Republic, in Libya post-Gaddafi, in Sudan as we speak now with the Darfur and other places being bombed. So those are external factors that take advantage of internal contradictions. So with the consequence that Africa cannot do agriculture well, Africa cannot exploit her resources to engage in pharmaceutical industry properly. Africa is not enjoying the dividends of the 4th industrial revolution. We are now going into the 5th industrial revolution. We have become consumers of what we do not produce and producers of what we do not consume. Africa still is famous for producing primary goods with very little or minimum value addition. When you are in that business where you are a farmer of rubber in Liberia and the raw rubber is taken to Europe for Michelin to make tires or Firestone to make tires, you cannot realize your potential. When you are a farmer of cocoa in Togo, La Côte d'Ivoire, or in Ghana, and you do not make chocolate, I know there are now attempts to make chocolate, but you take it to Cadbury in the United Kingdom or to Nestle in Switzerland, then you buy chocolate at 20 times what your cocoa was worth, then you cannot grow. When you have lithium in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Zimbabwe and you do not make batteries, then you take it to Europe and America. When you have coltan and no African country apart from assembling mobile phones are all importing mobile phones, then you cannot. If you have coffee and you do not have value addition, it's Nestle that does. If you have milk and it's later that is doing it, and even today in Africa, almost all the major water bottling companies have been bought by Coca-Cola or Nestle. That is the state in which Africa finds herself. We are even importing fish in Kenya from China and fish feed from Brazil. When your currencies mean nothing, when your economy is totally dominated by the dollar, dollarized, when your banking system is controlled, when your insurance system is controlled, then you have a problem. When you do not engage in meaningful research, they are all sponsored by external bodies. When your foreign policy is dominated, when your policy in critical areas is dominated by others, when your institutions are financed by the others, you cannot develop. Or even if you appear to do, you cannot do it in a sustainable manner. When your economies are literally controlled by the Bretton Woods institution, the World Bank and the IMF, when your Pan-African Bank with the 88 members as the second largest shareholder, the United States of America, followed by Germany and France and EU, you cannot grow. In other words, Africa in many ways is still laboring under the weight of foreign domination. Initially, it was the colonial powers from Europe. Then after the war, it is the single largest and biggest hegemon, the United States of America. We now see the Chinese in the last few years are coming very, very strongly. We see the Turks are coming very strongly. The GCC countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, all these countries are coming in very strongly. The net effect is, as somebody once said, when you are wearing a borrowed coat, you cannot do that with confidence. That is the state of Africa. And that is the state that we must deal with. We appeared to regain political independence, but the most important thing that can undergird that political independence is economic independence, which we don't have in many African countries. That is why sanctions work very effectively against African countries. A country like Zimbabwe, laboring under sanctions. Right now we see South Africa being threatened with sanctions because our economies are shadow economies that are controlled from Washington, D.C., or from Paris, or from Lisbon, or from London. We must cut that umbilical cord. If we don't, as the saying goes, the puppeteer will continue to control the puppet. And that is why very easily, despite the protestation of African heads of state to the contrary, when they are summoned to all these meetings that they go to, they are summoned to Washington to be told what to do. They are summoned to Sochi to be told what to do. They are summoned to Tokyo to be told what to do. They are summoned to Paris to be told what to do. They are summoned to Brussels to be told what to do. They are divided so that they enter into unfavorable bilateral arrangement to the detriment of the region and the continent. Africa must do what others have done. Energy. We must generate enough energy or sufficient energy to industrialize. Value addition. We must stop the brain drain. Some of our best men and women are outside. We must be in the nuclear age. We must be in the artificial intelligence age. As I speak to you now, we don't control technology. Twitter. All these, the internet, we don't. It is controlled from elsewhere. The experience of others tells us why China is what China is, why Japan is what she is, why Korea is what she is, why Vietnam is now becoming what it is becoming, is because they said in order to be in a position to completely realize sustainable development, we must control the levers of development. If we don't, then we will be controlled and manipulated. We are colonized. If anybody ever doubted that, that is why. And Kwame Nkrumah was ahead of his times in this regard. When in 1965, he wrote the book Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism and the most dangerous, he recognized that if you don't have economic independence, then you will be controlled and you will be manipulated. There is a great Korean economist, Ha-Jun Chang, who has written a book called The Bad Samaritans. He tells us those who are donors, they call themselves donors and development partners, those are bad Samaritans. They prescribe poison for you while they eat nectar and honey. And Dambisa Moyo, the young Zambian economist, has told us why aid is a dangerous thing. So the colonization and the burden under which we labor today is very subtle colonization. Sometimes it's not even so subtle. Remember, the French, for example, still controlled the currency of their former colonies. Remember that the organizations which are created in the post-colonial era are designed to achieve that very thing. So we are still colonized, and our presidents sometimes are merely doing the bidding of the colonizers. It's never lost on me, for example, in the United Kingdom, and I have never understood this. When we are approaching an election, the leading presidential candidates are invited to a place called Chatham, and they are debating. It happened with Kenya in the run-up to the elections in 2022. It happened in Nigeria. I hope it will not happen in the case of Ghana and in the case of Zimbabwe. But it is a statement. You young boys, you are going to engage in what in our mind is essentially the appointment of a school head prefect or head girl. We want to assess how you debate and how you will behave when you ultimately become the head boy and the head girl. They don't say it in such crude terms, but I believe that that is what it is all about. Then they invite you to a program called Hard Talk to ask you difficult questions to see whether you can withstand. We are still colonized. It's painful. Trade, not aid. That is what is sustainable. There are early stages, and it cannot be discounted that there are mutual interactions which are desirable. We live in a world, so Africa is not just about to isolate herself, but we must be very wary of how we structure those engagements. Because when the Chinese, or indeed any other power, comes to Africa or goes anywhere, they do it in a manner that will be in their best interest, and I have no problem with that. The problem with Africa is that we don't define our interests. We are quick to sign on the dotted lines. We must not. We must interrogate the thing that we sign. We must debate. Right now, you may know what is happening in Botswana and in Namibia. They have had a mining agreement with De Beers, where De Beers has been taking 50% of the proceeds of the mining sector. And they are negotiating. And in my view, they should be demanding 80%, not 50%. The same thing with Namibia. Has it happened before? Yes, it happened. The former president of Tanzania, John Joseph Pombe Magufuli, told Barrick and Acacia, you have not paid taxes for so many years, pay the tax. BARIC, we are entering into an agreement with you. We know we don't have the technology. We want transfer of technology and we want the share of the proceeds to increase. And it happened. It can be done. If you are a poor negotiator, you'll be manipulated. So the time has also come for we who are Africans to stop constantly blaming others. We have seen countries which after independence through enlightened leadership have done the right thing. Singapore, a little country with no more than 2 million people under the leadership of Lee Kuan Yew and his compatriots, did a good thing. Even in the Arab world, in the Emiratis, Qatar. The problem of Africa partly is that we have very bad political leaders. Terrible political leaders, people who don't care for their countries. And it is political bad manners and their thirst and hunger for primitive accumulation and theft on an industrial scale that sometimes undermine the continent of Africa. So the first thing that we must do is to be very clear about the men and women that we give the opportunity to serve us. It all starts from the top. If the head of the fish is rotten, that fish is rotten. History has demonstrated that not once, not twice, but times without number. There is no perfect leader, but there is one thing that I know, that when our people are enlightened and when our people know what they want and they know the power of the vote, they will invariably elect men and women who are capable of serving them well. And democracy and good governance demands eternal vigilance. The people must be eternally vigilant because power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In Africa, where you have leaders who are bankrupt, policy bankruptcy, what they do is to manipulate the population along tribal lines, along religious lines, and through corruption. So what must we do is to immunize the population through awareness. It's not easy, but it must be done. Have I seen countries where that has been done? Yes, I have. Tanzania is one such country where you had a leader who was selfless. He made his mistakes, but he came out. And today, Tanzania, with over 160 ethnic groups, you never hear about tribe as a basis for political mobilization. Ethnicity is to be celebrated culturally. Botswana is yet another country that did that. Rwanda is trying despite her difficulties. Uganda in the first 10 years of President Museveni also did very well. So one can give a number of countries where efforts are being made. Mozambique during the period of Samora and Chisano. And even Ghana, we saw that happening. So there are examples that can be cited to demonstrate that good efforts are being made. Kenya has had her problems, but it has, during short spaces, also demonstrated that if the people are vigilant and liberated from ethnicity, the problem will be minimized. It can be done. And indeed must be done. You know, I think it is President Museveni who put it very well that when we say that African countries are developed, it's like a competition among dwarfs as to which dwarf is taller than the other. With a GDP of 110 billion United States dollars, with a population of 55 million, this is a weak economy. If you are to compare that with the economy, say, of Denmark, with a population of 5 million and a GDP of over 500 billion, with no natural resources, we had better stop talking about being developed. What we ought to be talking about is that we have performed very badly, and what we ought to be doing is to engage the overdrive gear. Do we have the human resource in Kenya? Yes. The human resource, fantastic. You travel across this country and you see Kenyans in unique places. Do we have human resources in Nigeria? Amazing. There is not a country in the world which has the kind of human resource that Nigeria has dispersed in Ghana and in many countries. So what we ought to do is to create an enabling environment and to have clear development plans and have pronouncements which are implemented. Our problem is implementation. Can it be done? It has been done. You and me know and have been witnesses to a little desert called Dubai. In 30 years, they have succeeded in doing amazing things. Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, Brunei. It can be done. So I'm suggesting to we of the African stock, wherever we are, the time is now to wake up and begin to do the right things. The old saying goes, when you are looking for fish, you don't climb trees. We've been climbing trees for too long in search of fish. We'll never find them there. This thing called democracy, we must define it for ourselves. I no longer use it as frequently as I used to do in my younger day. I now talk about governance. And what do I mean governance? I mean involvement of people in formulation of policies that are going to be implemented for their benefit. Does it have a one-size-fits-all? No, it varies from country to country, and then it must be adapted in a manner that addresses the historical context in which it is being dealt with. So that what one sees in a country such as Rwanda is discipline. What we can borrow from Rwanda is a disciplined leadership that is clear about what they want. And when you have lived in an environment where everything goes, then when discipline is introduced, you label it dictatorship. So my view is discipline is critical, and subscription to the rule of law is also critical. Allowing people to participate and ideas to compete, because good governance, which sometimes is called democracy, is a competition of ideas, is a buffet of ideas where the weak ideas give way to the stronger ideas. And if an idea is found not to have been good, then it is replaced by a better idea. So I think discipline is at the very heart of sustainable development. In most African countries, we think that by changing the constitution we'll solve the problem. Political bad manners cannot be solved through constitutional amendments. We must just have what I call a character and behavioral transplant. If we have that, then our countries are going to move. And we must also have sustainable peace. You know, because we are part of the world, I was listening to a speech delivered on the 10th day of June 1963 by the then American President John F. Kennedy at the American University, and he was delivering a commencement speech, and he was talking about the significance of peace in the world. Because peace is the foundation stone upon which governance is based. In the absence of peace, which is sustainable and is not the peace of the graveyard, it is peace that is born out of mutual respect and born around the realization that in the face of disorder, nothing is achievable. Peace, sustainable peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. Let me talk about natural resources, and they must be seen in their diversity. And when we talk about natural resources, one would even be broad to talk about the physical resources, such as rivers, now the so-called blue economy. How are we using our hydroelectric resources? How are we using our geothermal resources? How are we using and manipulating minerals and other things? The answer to that question is value addition and expanding African markets. Do you know that intra-African trade stands at no more than 25%? Which means that within a population of nearly 1.5 billion, we are importing things that we ought not to import. We are exporting raw material without value addition. So going forward, in order to deal with our development and industrialization, we must begin to do two things. One, value addition. Setting our prices, trading amongst ourselves, getting into the technology space. If you are not in the technology space, in the medical technology space, in the military space, in the mobile telephony space, in the artificial intelligence space, then your resources will always be taken away from you, because in their raw form, they don't have any value to you. But if you have gone into the technology and industrialization space, then you will have appetite for them. And I think that that is what Africa must do. Is it beginning to happen? Yes, it is beginning to happen. You are beginning to see, for example, in the area of value addition, in a number of countries now, we are setting up industrial parks, including countries such as Rwanda, Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, South Africa, of course. They are setting up these industrial parks because they say this will be the incubation ground, which will then enable us to go to the next stage, because science does not know boundaries. So when it becomes a question of borrowing technology and sharing experiences, the global arena does provide. What it is that we must do is to say, what is in it for us? And fortune favors the vigilant. The great Indian Rabindranath Tagore once said, "You cannot cross the ocean by staring at it. You must try crossing it." That is what we must do. Development, understood in the broad sense to mean human development, and human development as therefore the enabler and the facilitator for the manipulation of natural resources, is at the heart of human development. And if Africa is to realize our potential, our human resources must be enabled through research, through provision of opportunities, so that they are able to utilize and to unleash their intelligence in order to manipulate the things that divinity and God has given to them. The last time I read the good book, it said, "Go ye and subdue the world." And you can only subdue the world when you are doing things that will be useful for you and generations yet to be born. In other words, what man can dream about, man can do. We have been dreaming for too long. The time is now for us to wake up, to give meaning to the things that we have dreamt.